the edge of the future. That's our theme for the event tonight. So I'd like to talk about the future, but I'm not going to give you a laundry list of predictions. And I'm not going to tell you the top 10 things that are going to happen in 2014, because I don't know. And in the future, I think we need more people who don't know, or at least who understand and are willing to admit that they don't know. I'll call those people foxes for reasons I'll explain in a moment, but it's our need for those people that I'd like to talk about. Foxes and hedgehogs are very popular metaphors for two contrasting styles of thinking. The broadly knowledgeable fox is more diffuse. He tends to navigate through life looking at things through a variety of lenses and viewpoints and perspectives. The hedgehog, on the other hand, deeply knowledgeable, is more focused. The hedgehog tends to have one organizing set of ideas, one theory that he or she uses to organize his entire world and experience. That's the fundamental difference. Now, we don't know the exact origin of this typology between foxes and hedgehogs, but we do know that it appeared at least 2,500 years ago in the writings of the Greek poet Archilochus, and then made popular in the 1950s in a book by Isaiah Berlin, who said, "The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing." You see, foxes seem to know something about everything, but hedgehogs seem to know everything about something in particular, that one big thing. Now, people may not fall neatly in one category or another, but often they tend to lean towards one side or another. And we don't need to do away with hedgehogs, but we do need more foxes. Hedgehogs' big ideas have included some phenomenal scientists, humanists, people whose one big idea has fundamentally transformed entire fields of inquiry. It was true for Freud with the unconscious, it was true for Einstein with relativity, and it was true for Darwin's proposed process of natural selection. Hedgehogs are popular with the media. They are highly sought out as commentators, and they are usually among the first to volunteer their views, insights, and opinions. In recent years, the hedgehog concept has even become the aspirational ideal in the business community. Jim Collins, former Stanford business professor, in his book Good to Great, evangelizes the way of the hedgehog. In his study of highly successful companies, he found that those that achieved greatness were those that did one thing and did it well. Now, as a business tactic, there's clearly merit to this hedgehog concept, but as an overall competitive strategy, it has to be put in context. So here's how Collins tells the story. Day after day, the cunning fox tries to catch the elusive hedgehog. But the hedgehog always does the same thing. He hunkers down into a tight little ball and puts out his spines, and the frustrated fox is fundamentally forced to walk away. In Collins' words, the hedgehog always wins. But here's an update from nature. Apparently, in some areas of the world, foxes are unfortunately responsible for very large declines in the hedgehog population. It turns out that foxes have adapted and the hedgehogs have not. The foxes have learned to approach the hedgehog knowing the hedgehog will hunker down into a spiny ball and the fox will walk away a few feet behind, and they wait patiently. And when the hedgehog believes the danger is past, he begins to uncurl. He extends his back legs, and when he does, the fox puts his sharp teeth into him. And after that, we'll just say the hedgehog doesn't always win. Despite the hedgehog's mastery of the hunker-down defense and the fact that he probably does it better than anybody else in the animal kingdom, he is vulnerable to a more agile and adaptive adversary. There are some fundamental differences, then, in the way that hedgehogs and foxes will approach problems and the way they orient themselves to the future. One is not inherently better than the other, but different styles work better for different kinds of problems in different environments and in different kinds of contexts. So, curling into a tight, spiny ball may be very effective at warding off small predators. But if you're trying to defend yourself against an oncoming car, maybe not so much. So, what are some of these overall differences between foxes and hedgehogs in their styles? Well, when it comes to strategy and planning, hedgehogs are characteristically determined. They pick a strategy and they stick to it, no matter what. Even when it looks like things aren't going their way, and even when it looks like their strategy isn't working. And they're the same way with their ideas. They have one big theory to organize the world. When new information comes in, they squeeze it into that theory, or they just dismiss it entirely. But they have to interpret an evolving reality to fit their preconceived ideas. Foxes, though, tend to be more adaptive. They're open to new information, they seek new information, and when new information comes in and it contradicts what they know, they reevaluate their assumptions and they reassess their strategy. Foxes and hedgehogs also differ in their fundamental intellectual values. Hedgehogs tend to be collectors of knowledge, whereas foxes tend to be more focused on learning. So in a competitive situation, a hedgehog will seek to know more than his opponent. But the foxes are looking for new ways to acquire information and apply that information. In their approach to the future, they also show some very stark differences. Hedgehogs tend to be highly confident. When they have reached an opinion about future events, they are certain that they are right. And they assert their opinion with confidence and with authority, and it's part of what makes them great media experts. But foxes are more likely to understand the uncertainty that is inherent in whatever decision they're making about the future. They're more likely to say, I don't know, or that's what I'm thinking at this point, or even I could be wrong. And then finally, as they implement a strategy, implement plans and ideas, they also take slightly different approaches. Hedgehogs tend to go full speed ahead. They've chosen a course of action, they commit to it, and they barrel ahead. Foxes, though, tend to move more incrementally. At each stage, they're pausing to see what kind of effect they're having on the environment with which they're interacting. They're seeing if there's any adjustment or change that's necessary as they proceed on to the next step. Psychologist Phil Tetlock did a study a few years ago of expert predictions of future events. Now, it turns out experts are terrible at prediction. As bad or worse than dart-throwing monkeys, Tetlock says. But some were more terrible and less terrible than others, which is what led Tetlock to look for possible differences between the fox's style and the hedgehog's style. So in Tetlock's study, the hedgehogs were confident, they were steadfast, and they were certain. And they were also the worst predictors. And as hedgehogs gained more knowledge, and as they gained more fame, the predictive accuracy actually got worse. Now, foxes, while their predictions weren't great, because no one's were, consistently outperformed the hedgehogs. They were more nuanced. They were more equivocal. They were less steadfast. But they outperformed the hedgehogs, and as they gained more knowledge, the accuracy of their forecasts actually increased. So as we stand on the edge of the future here, critical decisions depend on our ability to anticipate what lies ahead. But the future environment is tough. In the past, the world has seemed much more orderly and predictable, but that's not true anymore. The world's more complex, it's more interconnected, and it's highly dynamic. In the 1990s, the US Army came up with an acronym that describes this set of characteristics, and it's since migrated its way over into the business world. And the acronym is VUCA, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Key characteristics of the environment we are all facing. Those conditions, I would suggest, are a great fit for the Fox's style. In a stable environment, hedgehog strategies work fine, but they can break down in less stable environments. And hedgehogs are uncomfortable with complexity and change, but those are the conditions in which foxes will thrive. When there's a rapid, overwhelming pace of change, foxes will adapt. When there's pervasive uncertainty, the foxes will pause, reflect on their assumptions, reevaluate their positions, and make whatever adjustments are necessary. When there's overwhelming complexity, the foxes move beyond looking for simple cause and effect, but they look for nonlinear causal relationships. They take a systems view to see how different factors and parts of a process affect each other. They engage by learning. And then, finally, when navigating in a fog of ambiguous signals and outcomes, the foxes will move incrementally. This makes them much more agile and adaptive than if they were barreling full speed ahead on an unmodifiable course. They nudge their way through change. So, as we face the 21st century and prepare young leaders for 21st century jobs, we need to be nurturing more foxes. Strategists and problem solvers who are always thinking and constantly adapting. How do we do that? Well, I'd like to offer 3 suggestions for your consideration. One is, don't confuse certainty with accuracy. There are tons of studies in the decision-making literature showing that being more certain doesn't make it any more likely that you are right. Certainty and accuracy are 2 different things. So be willing to listen to those suggestions that start with what if, or I wonder what would happen, or even, well, this may seem silly, but. You don't have to defer to those ideas, but don't dismiss them. Be willing to listen to the quiet voices, too. Second, don't confuse broad interests with being scatterbrained. Universities, for example, talk a lot about interdisciplinarity, but the intellectual guilds in our traditional academic disciplines run very deep in higher education. Each discipline believes it's right. And so when our students wander across the border into the lands of a neighboring discipline, we're very quick to yank them back in and try to bring them back in line. But the truth is, some of the greatest innovations in history have come not from thinking harder about a problem based on what we already know, but from applying a new perspective or a borrowed perspective to an old problem. And then finally, I would say don't confuse being adaptive with being wishy-washy. Look, the future is inherently unpredictable. And we're foolish to act like it's not. To paraphrase Colin Gray, who's one of my favorite strategists, when you're thinking about the future, remember that you're not an expert on the subject. So as we anticipate the future, embrace the question of why. And be willing to think about how you know something and not just what you know. And when you find yourself getting tired of hearing, on the other hand, don't be tempted to cut off that other hand, because you just might need it later. So, if we do these things, we just might be able to hear the foxes, which is good, because their voices are important, and we are going to need them in the future to help us muddle through the VUCA and to generate solutions to some of the most challenging global problems that lie ahead of us. Well, at least that's what I'm thinking at this point. I could be wrong. Thanks.